The room fell silent the moment I slid the envelope across the table. Funny, considering they'd been laughing just seconds before. They had no idea the clause they'd ignored would turn the entire board on its feet. And as their smiles cracked, I realized silence was the sharpest weapon I had ever wielded. The morning the board summoned me, the office hallways felt colder than usual, like the building itself was holding its breath. Fluorescent lights hummed above me, too bright, too sterile, casting thin blades of white across the glass walls. Everyone I passed wore that same rehearsed expression, polite neutrality with a dash of nosy curiosity. They'd heard rumors, of course. Termination proceedings, contract disputes. Apparently, she pushed too far. I kept walking, heels tapping a steady rhythm that betrayed none of the tremor in my chest. Inside, a quiet fury simmered, controlled, contained, the way embers glow before deciding whether to become warmth or wildfire. I reached the boardroom doors and paused. My reflection stared back at me from the glossy surface. Composed, calm, outrage tucked neatly behind mascara and a tailored blazer. I inhaled once, deeply, grounding myself in the truth no one else in this building seemed to know. They thought I was here to accept a decision. They had no idea I had come with one. When I stepped inside, the long mahogany table was already ringed with directors, their faces lit by soft blue screens and self-importance. They didn't rise, not a single one. Instead, the chair offered a tight smile, the kind you give a guest you hope won't stay long, before gesturing at the empty seat across from him. "Thank you for coming," he began, voice smooth, practiced. "We'll make this brief." A ripple of amusement traveled among them, like a private joke unfolded in perfect sync. It wasn't subtle, but I sat, folding my hands gently on the table as though they weren't about to question my very right to be there. The HR director leaned forward first. "Your contract specifies mutual termination protocols. However, due to recent performance concerns," I raised an eyebrow. "Recent?" The word floated between us like a dropped pen, small but loud enough to echo. She stiffened. "Yes, several members of leadership have expressed that your decisions have been inconvenient," I offered softly. A few screens flickered, someone coughed, 2 paragraphs in and the air already felt fragile, thin ice beneath expensive shoes, which made what happened next even more satisfying. Because while they thought I was cornered, I had already seen the cracks in their polished narrative, the contradictions in their paperwork, the sloppy assumption that I was just another employee without the patience or the spine to read every line of a contract they themselves had drafted. I waded through another scripted speech, nodding occasionally, letting them believe they were steering the moment. My silence made them confident. My stillness made them careless. Then, the CFO, impatient to conclude the performance, slid a folder toward me. "This outlines the terms. You'll find them fair. Please sign and we can move forward." Fair. The word almost made me laugh. Instead, I opened my bag and pulled out the sealed envelope, cream paper, embossed edge, a quiet contrast to their sterile corporate printouts. I placed it exactly where the CFO's folder had been. "What is this?" the chair asked, eyes narrowing. "My response," I said simply. 2 directors exchanged glances, smirks tugging at their lips, as if I had just handed them a resignation letter decorated with glitter. Let them smirk. Let them underestimate. The pause before a storm always feels like a joke to people who don't notice the clouds. "Go on," I said, leaning back. "Open it." But the chair didn't move immediately. Something in my voice must have scraped against his confidence, because he hesitated, briefly, before breaking the seal. As he unfolded the paper, the room's energy shifted, a subtle tightening, like the collective inhale of a crowd before the magician reveals the card they never expected. A microsecond of confusion flashed across his face, and then recognition. Real, sharp, unmistakable recognition. He wasn't the only one. Heads tilted, brows drew together. The hum of whispered calculations filled the air like static. They had found it. The clause. The one buried near the end of the contract. The one nobody bothered revising, because it never mattered. The one that, in the event of internal restructuring, granted a single-person veto rights over executive decisions, including terminations. Their mistake was assuming no one would ever qualify for it. Their bigger mistake was assuming I hadn't noticed when I quietly did. And as the chair reread the line for the third time, the smirks evaporated. Where did you get this? His voice had lost its polish. You gave it to me, I said, not unkindly. On my first week. Silence cracked across the room. This was only the beginning, but the tension, the delicious rising tension, was enough to make the fluorescent lights flicker in agreement. They finally understood I wasn't here to surrender. I was here to remind them what they'd signed. They have no idea what's coming when someone checks who authorized her termination. The board reconvened after a strained 15-minute internal review, which was really just code for panic behind a closed door. I stayed seated in the hallway outside, elbows resting lightly on the armrests, pretending to scroll my phone. But I wasn't reading anything. I was listening. Muffled voices bled through the frosted glass, sharp, hurried, no longer rehearsed. The tone of people who suddenly realize the floor they're standing on was never solid, just painted to look that way. Every few seconds, someone mentioned the same dreaded phrase, veto rights. When the doors finally opened, the directors emerged in pairs, trying and failing to compose themselves. I rose slowly, smoothing my blazer, as if I were the one granting them an audience. Several avoided eye contact. The CFO didn't. His stare was a mix of frustration and the kind of fear people get when they realize the spreadsheet they trusted was missing a column. Please, the chair said when he reappeared, voice tied around the edges, join us again. The shift in power was almost physical, like the air pressure dropping before a rainstorm. I stepped inside the boardroom, noticing the small but significant changes. Screens dimmed, folders closed, whispers silenced. Their confidence hadn't just cracked, it had begun to leak. We've reviewed the clause you brought forward, the chair began, trying to sound authoritative, yet sounding more like someone reading instructions off a medicine label. It seems there may have been an oversight in your termination process. Oversight. Such a gentle word for attempted corporate execution without checking the contract. I rested my hands on the table. An oversight that nullifies the entire proceeding. A director tapped her pen nervously. We just need clarification. Your role at the time, your reporting line, your seniority, all documented, I said, and all matching the criteria for the veto holder. You can confirm in the HR archives. At the mention of HR, 3 people flinched. Interesting. Another micro crack. The HR director cleared her throat. There must have been a misunderstanding about your eligibility. We believed the clause was outdated. So you didn't read it? The question was soft, but it landed on the table like a dropped weight. She didn't answer. The chair leaned forward. Let's be reasonable. Even if the clause is active, the veto applies only to termination decisions made by the executive committee. The board's decision is separate. Ah, there it was. Their last shelter, a flimsy umbrella against a legal hailstorm. I pulled out the second sheet from the envelope, placing it gently before him. This is the document detailing the governance restructuring, I said. You approved it 8 months ago. It transferred all termination authority to the Executive Committee for Efficiency. Which means... I paused, letting the moment breathe, letting the realization bloom across their faces like a bruise. You fired someone whose termination you no longer had the right to authorize, and you did it without consulting the veto holder. The CFO's jaw tightened. Where did you even find that restructuring memo? In the shared drive, I replied. Under final underscore, use this one too. .pdf. A few directors winced. Office archaeology is rarely flattering. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The weight of consequences, legal, reputational, structural, settled across the table. These weren't people accustomed to being wrong in writing. The chair exhaled slowly. We will need time to reassess. I assumed you might, I said, which is why I already printed the chain of authorizations. I slid another page across the table. The original signatories, the version history, and the timestamp showing who last edited it. Several faces paled, because the truth was printed right there in clean black text. The person who finalized the restructuring memo, the one that made my veto active, was also the one who had pushed hardest for my termination. And they knew it. Oh, they knew it. I watched the realization ripple around the room like a shockwave traveling silently through water. But I didn't say the name. I didn't need to. The board would do that part themselves. Is there anything else we should be aware of? The chair asked quietly, almost respectfully. Just one thing, I thought. But not yet. Not before they understood exactly how deep their own signatures went. I smiled politely. For now? No. And the room exhaled, not with relief, but with the awareness that they had only seen the first page of a story they thought they controlled. They still haven't checked who on the board authorized the illegal termination. And when they do, everything shatters. If you're hooked by how power shifts in silence, stay with me. Follow and drop a comment about the wildest office oversight you've ever seen. The board dismissed me for the day, formally, politely, like someone carefully placing a glass object they suddenly realize might explode if handled wrong. I stepped out of the room without looking back, letting the door click softly behind me. But the moment it closed, a wave of exhaustion washed over me, warm and heavy, as if the tension I'd carried had been holding my bones together. Yet beneath the exhaustion, something else pulsed. A quiet, rising current of certainty. They were unraveling, and they didn't even know from which thread. I walked toward my office, the corridor buzzing faintly with the usual mid-afternoon chaos, phones ringing, keyboards chatter-clicking, someone whispering aggressively about a deadline. The open floor plan felt too bright, too exposed, a stage where everyone pretended they weren't watching everyone else. Except today, they weren't pretending. I felt their eyes, quick glances, curious flicks upward from monitors, the subtle swiveling of chairs as whispers trailed behind me. News always travels faster inside a corporate ecosystem than any internal memo. Word had spread that something unexpected happened in the boardroom, that someone, me, had walked in quiet and walked out intact. I entered my office and closed the door, savoring the temporary silence. Light spilled across the desk, catching the gold edge of the contract I'd studied so obsessively that the paper now held the faint memory of my fingerprints. I traced the outline of the veto clause with one fingertip, the way someone touches a keepsake they never expected to matter. Then my computer pinged, a calendar notification flashed, leadership sync, attendance required, immediate. Of course they'd escalate. I straightened my blazer and headed upstairs to the executive floor, colder, quieter, carpeted so thick it swallowed footsteps. The The moment I stepped into the meeting room, 3 department heads stiffened like they'd seen a ghost they weren't supposed to acknowledge. "Ah," one of them said tightly. "We didn't expect you." "Well," I replied, taking a seat, "that makes 2 of us." Subtle, polite, enough to make them shift in their chairs. The COO arrived last, carrying a folder so stuffed the edges buckled. He took the chair at the head of the table, pulling in a breath sharp enough to cut fabric. "So," he began, "there seems to be some confusion regarding your employment status." "No," I said pleasantly. "There seems to be confusion regarding your understanding of internal governance." One manager's pen froze midair. The COO opened the folder. "Regardless of the clause you brought forth, terminations require multi-layer validation. We're simply ensuring no procedural steps were missed." "At this point," I said gently, "the only step missed was reading." A beat, 2. Then, quietly, he slid a single sheet across the table toward me. "This is the authorization document," he said, "the one that proposed your termination." My breath caught, but not because of fear, because of the timing. The timestamp on the internal form was from 6:14 a.m., not the day they summoned me, not even the week before, but the same morning, hours before the board reviewed anything, before HR prepped talking points, before anyone spoke to me. Someone wanted my exit so badly. They initiated it before sunrise. "And here," the COO continued, tapping the lower right corner, "is the signatory." He thought he was revealing this to me. He thought this was new information. He thought this might intimidate me, but it only confirmed what I already suspected, that desperation makes people sloppy, and fear makes them bold. I looked at the signature. My pulse stayed perfectly steady. "Interesting," I said softly. One of the managers swallowed hard. Do you recognize the name?" I met their eyes, offering a small, unreadable smile. "I do." Cracks spread across the room's composure like fractures in ice. Everyone knew what came next, just not from whom, or when, or how sharply. I rose, smoothing my jacket. "Thank you for the update. I'll let the board know I've seen this." The COO blinked. "You're telling them?" "No," I said as I stepped out the door. "I'm letting them find out." Because the truth wasn't mine to weaponize. It was theirs to uncover, and their reactions would speak louder than anything I could say. And once they traced the signature back to its origin, back to the exact person who tried to oust the only veto holder in the company, well, the building wouldn't stay quiet for long. They still haven't realized the timestamp exposes the whole conspiracy, and who signed it will ruin someone's career. The elevator doors slid shut with a soft metallic sigh, sealing me into a capsule of humming solitude. For the first time all day, I allowed my shoulders to drop, not in defeat, but in the quiet release that comes when the pieces of a puzzle finally stop fighting their arrangement. The signature, the timestamp, the pre-dawn urgency. Someone had been terrified of me long before I ever walked into the boardroom. As the elevator rose, the mirrored walls reflected a version of me I barely recognized, calm, unreadable, almost serene. Not because the storm had passed, but because I could now trace its origin. And storms, once named, become easier to walk through. When the doors opened onto my floor, movement stopped. Half a dozen employees froze mid-task, one holding a stack of printouts, another hovering over the coffee machine, 2 more whispering near the communal table. They watched me with an intensity usually reserved for people who've just dodged a meteor. I offered a polite nod and kept walking. My office felt warmer than before, sunlight having slid across the carpet in a golden stripe. I sat, opened my laptop, and waited, not for an email, not for a message, but for the inevitable shift in the building's atmosphere. It came sooner than expected. A knock, firm, too quick, too precise. I opened the door to find Mara, one of the senior analysts, breathing slightly too fast, as if she'd sprinted down the hallway. "Can I?" She glanced left, then right. "Can I close the door?" I gestured for her to enter, and she slipped inside, shutting us away from the curious eyes outside. "There's something you should know," she whispered. "About the termination request." My pulse didn't spike, but something in the center of my chest tightened with interest. I didn't prompt her. Silence is a powerful invitation. "I was in early this morning," she said. "Around 6, I saw someone printing something from the executive drive. They looked on edge, and later, when I passed the printer station, there were shredded documents in the bin." "Did you see who it was?" I asked. She hesitated. "Yes, but I'm afraid to say the name. Fear, always a sign the truth is close." "You don't have to," I reassured her gently. "Just tell me what you saw." Her voice trembled. "A director, high level, and when I checked the login logs for routine audits." She stopped, swallowing hard. "Their credentials were used to access your contract at 5:58 a.m. The same morning, the same urgency, the same person." I inhaled slowly, letting the confirmation settle like dust on a quiet surface. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked softly. "Because," she said, wringing her hands, "you weren't supposed to see that signature. And if the board finds out who initiated it, I don't know what will happen." I knew, but she didn't need to. Before I could respond, another knock shattered the moment, louder this time, impatient. Mara jumped as the door flew open. The corporate counsel stepped inside, expression tight as a violin string pulled one twist too far. "We need to speak," he said. "In my office?" I asked, rising. "No," he replied. "Upstairs. The board wants you. Now." Of course they did. The signature had traveled faster than any rumor. I gave Mara a nod, gratitude, reassurance, a promise that she wasn't alone, and she slipped out quietly, her shoulders easing once she passed the threshold. The counsel walked beside me as we headed toward the executive elevator, but he kept glancing at me the way people look at someone carrying lit dynamite, cautiously, wide-eyed, aware that the next second could change everything. "Is there something I should know?" I asked lightly. His jaw tightened. "They've started reviewing the timestamp." A small spark of satisfaction warmed my chest. Not triumph, just confirmation that gravity still worked, that cause still led to consequence. "And the signatory?" I asked. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence told me everything. When the elevator doors opened to the board level, the atmosphere practically vibrated. Voices echoed through the corridor, sharp, clipped, overlapping like broken glass. Someone was pacing, someone was arguing, someone was trying very, very hard to keep control of the narrative. But the narrative had slipped. As I approached the boardroom, I heard the chair's voice, low, furious, barely contained. "We cannot ignore the timestamp. If this was initiated without authority..." A second voice cut him off, trembling with anger. "We need to confirm who accessed the system. The logs show..." Then silence, heavy, sudden, because they knew I was standing just outside. The counsel opened the door for me. I stepped inside, every head turned. And the person whose signature I had already seen, whose panic had begun at 6:14 a.m., whose desperation had liquefied itself into a digital paper trail, sat rigid at the table, knuckles white, eyes avoiding mine like I was sunlight, and they were a shadow trying not to be erased. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The truth was already sitting on the table, printed in black ink, waiting to be acknowledged. They still haven't confronted the signatory directly. But the moment they do, the betrayal will hit harder than any accusation. The boardroom felt different this time, not tense in the abstract, but charged in a way that made the air feel heavier, as if every molecule had been assigned a duty. Hold your position, don't move, don't breathe too loudly. I stepped inside with the corporate counsel at my side, though it was clear he wasn't guiding me. If anything, he seemed to be seeking cover behind me. Strange reversal, considering hours ago they had tried to remove me altogether. The chair cleared his throat. It didn't help. His voice still wavered. "Please take your seat." Not Ms. Reyes, not as discussed, not even the stiff formalities they loved to hide behind. Just a plain request, human, uneasy. I took the same seat as before, folding my hands calmly atop the table. My heartbeat stayed steady. They were the ones rattled now. Across from me sat the signatory, the one whose pre-dawn panic had birthed this entire sequence. I watched as they shifted papers that didn't need shifting, straightened pens already straight, blinked too often. Everyone else noticed too. The chair opened a folder. "We've completed an initial review of the logs associated with the termination authorization." He inhaled sharply. "It appears the request was not vetted through appropriate channels." Not vetted. A delicate phrase, like calling a wildfire a warm breeze. Another director leaned forward, jaw tight. We also confirmed the timestamp. 6:14 in the morning? Her gaze flicked, pointed, deliberate, toward the signatory. Before any board consultation. Silence rippled outward. Not empty, loaded. The signatory finally spoke, voice thin, stretching for composure. "It was a preliminary draft, nothing binding, a clerical action." "A clerical action?" someone echoed, incredulous. "Your credentials were used to access the contract archive at 5:58 a.m., another added, "and to print a termination form before sunrise." The signatory swallowed. Their throat bobbed like someone trying to force down a confession that refused to be swallowed. "I was preparing for possibilities." Interesting word choice. Possibilities. As if a quiet attempt to push me out was merely brainstorming before breakfast. The chair's voice dropped, more steel than before. "Preparing a termination request without explicit authority is a violation of governance protocol." "And," the counsel added, placing a document on the table, "it also bypassed the veto clause holder entirely." Every eye turned to me, not accusing, recognizing. I met their gaze calmly. I wasn't consulted. That was enough. One sentence, and the boardroom's balance shifted again. The signatory leaned forward abruptly. "This is being blown out of proportion. The clause is archaic. No one expected her." They stopped themselves, correcting with painful effort. "No one expected the clause to still be active?" "So you ignored it," I said gently. Not mocking, not triumphant. Just truth laid out like a paperweight. Their expression flickered. Guilt, anger, fear, denial, all fighting for top billing. A director tapped the table with 2 fingers. "You understand this creates legal exposure for the company." "And reputational damage," another added. "And," the chair said, "a breach of internal trust." The signatory's composure finally cracked. Their voice rose. She was obstructing decisions, slowing processes, challenging authority. My brows lifted slightly. "By requesting documentation?" "That wasn't your role," they snapped. "It is," I corrected softly, "when the documentation concerns decisions that affect me." The board exchanged glances, some sympathetic, some chastened, some outright furious. though not at me. A storm was forming, and the signatory sat directly beneath its eye. The CFO spoke first, voice icy. "You acted alone." The CHRO followed, firmer. "You acted prematurely." The council added the final blow. "And you acted without authorization." The signatory stared down at the table, shoulders caving inward, not in defeat, but in fear of the consequences assembling around them like chess pieces. Every director turned toward the chair, waiting for the final verdict, but instead, the chair looked at me. "Do you have anything to add?" The question was a door, an opening for retaliation, for public humiliation, for vengeance disguised as professionalism. But I didn't walk through it. I didn't need to. "No," I said softly. "The facts speak for themselves." A slow, subtle exhale passed through the room. Surprise, respect, maybe even relief. I wasn't here to destroy anyone. I just wasn't willing to be destroyed. The chair nodded, closing the folder. "We will deliberate further. Thank you for your cooperation." I stood, smoothed my jacket, and walked toward the exit. Just before reaching the door, I paused. Not for drama, for clarity. Because while I wouldn't retaliate, I would name what mattered. Without turning back, I said, "Accountability is not vengeance, it's alignment." And then I walked out, leaving the weight of the words, and the truth behind them, hanging in the boardroom like a recalibrated clock finally ticking again. The hallway outside the boardroom felt warmer than the room I'd just left, as if the building itself recognized the shift in power and sighed in relief. My heels clicked softly against the polished floor while the door eased shut behind me. Quiet, final, like a page turning itself. I didn't rush. When people expect you to crumble, moving slowly becomes its own declaration. On my way back to the executive floor, snippets of conversation drifted from open office doors, half-hushed tones, rustling papers, someone muttering numbers under their breath as if they could calculate their way out of discomfort. Nothing about the company felt stable today. Not the workflows, not the leadership, not even the oxygen. I passed a glass wall and caught my reflection, composed, unhurried, unshaken. My pulse had settled into a steady rhythm, the kind one feels on the edge of a quiet beach before dawn, still, but ready. My office awaited, but I didn't go there immediately. Instead, I stepped into the small communal lounge tucked behind the executive wing. It was empty at this hour, bathed in soft afternoon light that filtered through tall windows. For a moment, I let myself breathe, really breathe, letting the air settle where tension had lived all day. Then my phone buzzed, a message from someone I did not expect. Mara. They're requesting system access logs for the past 3 weeks, not just the termination file, everything. Interesting. A broader search meant something had spooked them, something besides the signature, or someone. I typed back a simple thank you, then slipped my phone away, thoughts turning like gears, quiet, precise, inevitable. Another buzz? This time, an email notification, a forwarded chain, from the corporate council. Subject line, Governance Inquiry. Immediate findings. I opened it. Inside was a clean, itemized list of internal actions tied to the signatory's credentials. Accesses, overrides, late-night logins, attempted file reclassifications. Not illegal per se, but highly irregular, and all centered around one target: me. Someone had spent weeks preparing the stage for my removal. Someone had counted on me being quiet. Someone had assumed I wouldn't read every line of every document they tried to bury. The realization should have angered me. Instead, a strange peace unfurled in my chest, quiet, certain, almost tender. Because now the truth wasn't scattered, it had shape, form, edges they couldn't ignore. I headed back to my office, closing the door behind me just as my desk phone rang. The internal line, direct, urgent. "This is Reyes." A pause, a breath, then the chair's voice, subdued in a way I'd never heard before. "We've reached a conclusion." I didn't sit. Standing felt right, steady, grounded, anchored in something larger than the room. "We've confirmed that the termination attempt violated internal protocol, governance procedure, and contractual requirements," he said. "The responsible party will be suspended pending further investigation." Suspended. The word hovered in the air, heavy with consequence. But that wasn't the part that lingered with me. The chair continued, a slight tremor beneath his usual authority. "And we owe you an apology." A soft wind seemed to sweep the room, the kind that moves curtains without touching them. A shift, subtle but undeniable. "This company," he said, "forgot the value of the people who uphold it. You reminded us, quietly, firmly, and correctly. For that, we thank you." His sincerity surprised me more than all the chaos of the day. I didn't respond immediately, not out of hesitation, but out of choosing the right words, the right tone, the right balance between grace and truth. "Thank you for addressing it," I finally said. "That's all I ever needed." Another silence, this one warmer. "We'd like to discuss next steps," the chair added. "When you're ready." When I was ready. Not them, not HR, not the signatory who had clawed for control before sunrise. Me. "Tomorrow morning," I said calmly. "Very well. Rest well, Ms. Reyes." When the call ended, the office seemed to settle around me. Safe, familiar, mine. I walked to the window and looked out at the city spread beneath the fading sky. Buildings stood tall, indifferent to the dramas inside them. Streets buzzed with people unaware of how many quiet battles were fought in conference rooms every day. No one watching from outside could guess that a single clause, once overlooked, underestimated, dismissed, had reshaped the day so completely. But I knew something deeper. Power isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like patience. Sometimes it sounds like silence. Sometimes it arrives the moment someone finally reads what they should have read from the start. And as I stood there, watching the city lights blink on one by one, a soft, tired smile found my lips. Not triumph, not vindication, alignment. Exactly as it should be.